Okay, so throughout NFL history, I'm sure you can remember a very select few of players who, be it their fault or not, blew their chance at stardom in the NFL. Think of those very obscure names that you just barely remember that for one moment you thought, hey, this guy can really be something. So yeah, let's just get straight into it and let's look at 7 NFL players who fumbled the bag of becoming an NFL star. Who here remembers Thomas Rawls? He started off rough because he straight up went undrafted in the 2015 NFL draft, but that was not going to determine Thomas Rawls' future because he worked his way into a team and got signed to the Seattle Seahawks, except he wasn't going to get any chance as it was because he was behind one guy named Marshawn Lynch. But Thomas Rawls got his shot pretty much immediately, as in the 3rd week of his rookie season, Marshawn went down with an injury and Thomas Rawls stepped in, rushing for 104 yards on the game. But you can only really do so much behind a Hall of Fame running back, so he only got a few more chances throughout the season, getting 5 chances to start with Marshawn Lynch coming back from injury. Except in those 5 starts, he logged 608 total rushing yards, averaging 126 rushing yards per game. And in those very select few weeks where he actually got to, display his talent, he ran for 169 yards in a game, and another game where he logged 209 rushing yards, the second most in the league that year. The narrative was perfect. It was Marshawn Lynch, whose contract was ending that season, handing the crown of the next great Seattle Seahawks running back to Thomas Rawls.
And that is Rawls, who is the injured Seahawk.
Turns out when you're at his build of running back, you can only take punishment for so long, and for him, his time ran out real quick. Thomas, if you were like an all-time great, look at this. Look at this. I got his autograph. This could have been worth thousands. But of course, this is going to be a common theme for running backs who just never made that superstar status. And Jay Ajayi is one of those guys. And I guess similarly to Thomas Rawls, Jay Ajayi was drafted in the 5th round, which is damn near undrafted, and didn't get a shot early on into his career. I mean, I'm not lying. It literally took an injury to Lamar Miller, the running back ahead of him, then Arian Foster retiring in the season, and then Jay Ajayi getting taken off the healthy scratch list. So finally, Jay Ajayi, by a process of elimination, was now the starting running back. But after his first 20-plus yard carry game, he absolutely exploded, running for 204 yards and 2 touchdowns. And then the very next week, he did it again, running for another 200-plus yard game with 214 yards and another touchdown. So now Jay Ajayi was just one of 4 players in NFL history to run for at least 200 yards in 2 straight games. What a weird player. Anyway, after one of the best stretches of all time, Jay Ajayi kinda just became painfully average, except he randomly logged another 200-plus yard game after he finally got 21-plus carries in a game. But of course, with that, 200-yard game, he paid a price, tearing his shoulder, ending his season. He basically went into the next year and was the definition of inconsistent, logging random 100-yard games here and there, but eventually, on Halloween Day, Jay Ajayi was traded for a 4th-round pick to the Eagles. The man had very little to no value. So yeah, he ended up in Philly and actually was serving some pretty good minutes with them. He split times with LeGarrette Blount, his other running back, during the entire season, and ended up running for 57 yards in the Super Bowl, where the Eagles would go on to win. And in his next season, Eagles fans actually had a lot of expectations for him, but they were immediately squashed, as after week 5, he tore his ACL, ending his entire career. And yeah, that was that for Jay Ajayi. But nowadays, hey, he signed to an esports team, and this very kind Redditor was able to track his stats completely. So he's doing well for himself, don't worry. So we all know Sammy Watkins as this journeyman receiver nowadays, but you gotta remember there was actually a time where Sammy Watkins was one of, if not the best, wide receiver prospect of all time. I mean, the man was drafted 4th overall in a 2014 wide receiver class that had Odell Beckham Jr., Devontae Adams, Brandon Cooks, and Mike Evans, and Sammy Watkins was leagues ahead of all of those guys at the time. Not now, though. And you know, what's actually a outlier for this list at least is that early on in his career, he was looking very promising, as he actually was doing well in his rookie year, and after dealing with injury and complaining about targets in his second year, he had a stretch of games from weeks 12 through 17 where every single game the man had at least 80 receiving yards. But what isn't talked about is that during his time, his body was paying the toll. I mean, holy lord, his injury report is longer than the Constitution. Anyway, over time, there was too many, screws put in his ankles, and the injuries just continued to pile up one after the other, and also mental health ended up being a huge problem for him, as he just wasn't able to cope with fans calling him a bust over and over again. But you could still make a very good argument that Sammy Watkins' career was a success, as he's still in the NFL today, and for most of these guys, you can't say that about them. Now, this might be the weirdest fall off in recent NFL history. Who here actually remembers watching Anthony Harris? Anthony Harris, if you don't know, was an absolute dog for the Vikings for about 2 seasons in the 2019 and 2020 season. I mean, he was just everywhere on the field. He could do anything for the Vikings, and he was one of the most versatile players at his position. Combining with Harrison Smith, they made the best safety duo in the league. It was called Harris and Smith. And as well as his insane production on the field, his statistical measurements were on a different stratosphere. PFF was in love with this man in his prime. And I honestly couldn't find anything on his downfall as a player. He kind of just missed out on a contract with the Vikings and then left to go to Philly, where he was never the same player. He doesn't even have anything in his injury history. He's on record to have 0 injuries ever, and I guess he just kind of faded away. So like I said, he signed with Philly and was absolutely underwhelming there, not really making any mistakes and not doing anything that stood out, but he found himself in Denver where he was cut this season. So, man, that's a new low, getting cut by Denver. Now let's talk about the guy who I'm sure dotted into your mind immediately when you first saw this title, and that is Kenny Golladay. Man, I was all in on the Golladay hype early in his career. He was drafted in the 3rd round by Detroit, and early on in his career, he made a great pairing with Matthew Stafford, locking 2 elite seasons as a wide receiver. He was one of, if not the best 50-50 ball deep threat in the entire NFL. At 6'4", 213, there were very few corners that could compete with him. He had multiple 120-plus yard games in 2019 and had arguably his best game against the Giants, going 6 for 123 and 2 touchdowns. And I guess the Giants just saw this game and figured, yeah, this is the guy that we're getting. Because after a 2020 season where he wasn't the same guy as before and dealt with injuries, the Giants said, screw it, and handed him a $72 million contract. But what's also forgetting about his time with the Giants is that for 5 games, he was actually playing like he usually does for the most part, but then another injury kinda just ended Kenny Golladay as we knew him. So, yeah, instead the Giants are now stuck with one of the biggest free agent busts of all time. Man, Martavius Bryant had all the talent a wide receiver could ever ask for and just blew it all away. Back in 2014, he was an absolute steal when the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted him in the 4th round, pairing him up with Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, and a prime Antonio Brown. He didn't play very much during the season and didn't play at all until week 7, and when he did, he had some solid games, as one game he had 4 catches for 143 yards and a touchdown, as well as a solid outing in the playoffs in a loss where he caught 5 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown. And going into his next season, it would all begin, as for the first 4 games, he was suspended for marijuana use.
Stay off the weed!
But my god, he still was just dripping talent, as in his first game back, he had 6 catches for 137 yards and 2 touchdowns. And it was just a solid year overall, as he also had another crazy catch in the playoffs where he just caught this between his legs catch while doing a flip. And now going into the 2016 season, people were expecting a ton out of Martavius, because now with Antonio Brown being the best receiver in the league, Martavius had a ton of open space to suspended for weed for the whole season.
Stay off the damn weed.
And yeah, this was pretty much the end of Martavius as a Steeler. He came back the next season and was a shell of himself, complaining about targets and making some drama because this was the 2010 Steelers, and that's what they did. Anyway, he got traded to the Raiders for a 3rd round pick, which is absolutely great value, and he did nothing on the Raiders besides completing one of the worst drops I've ever seen in my life. Then he got suspended again for, guess what?
Weed.
Now, for the last guy, I want to talk about one more guy who deserves to be talked about, but isn't really well known among younger fans today, and that's Brandon Lloyd. Very, very weird career, as during the beginning of his career, he bounced around from team to team, going between San Francisco, Washington, and Chicago, not being very effective wherever he went. And also, there is a very good case to be made that Brandon Lloyd suffered through the worst season for a starting receiver in the Super Bowl era when he played for Washington. So, I don't know, Brandon Lloyd maybe took this personally and went to Denver, and in his 2nd season there, had the best season a wide receiver had in 2010, logging 77 catches for 1,448 yards and 11 touchdowns, out of completely nowhere. Once again, similar to Anthony Harris, Brandon Lloyd's downfalls were very unclear as injuries weren't a big problem, but he kind of just bounced around from team to team as he did before and was okay at best. There were a ton of reports on him at the time that he just wasn't a very good teammate, or maybe suffered from some form of social anxiety because he seemed to never care if their team won or lost a game. But yeah, Brandon Lloyd called it a career after 7 different stops in the NFL and fumbled his chance at stardom. So what do you think? There's obviously a ton of more players that I could have mentioned, and I might do a part 2 if you guys like this video. So tell me in the comments below some players that you believe fumbled their chance at stardom as well. Anyways, until next time.